Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here, back in the Bay Area. I live in New York City, and every time I come here, it's great to see the energy, excitement, and innovation that happens here. Always brings me back here. Some fond memories, too. Um, Today, I'm going to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, which is product-led growth. And my first experience with product-led growth was, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago when I was at Microsoft, and I was leading growth for an org within Azure. And that's when I really saw the power of product-led growth. We took a key PLG concept around freemium model, and that turned that into a really fast-growing revenue driver for the company. And the impact was pretty amazing to see that. And that's when I decided to be in this area and really stay, because I really enjoyed the space. My most recent experience at product-led growth was at Atlassian, where I led the product-led growth org, which was responsible for helping drive Atlassian's growth strategy all the way from acquisition, retention, monetization, et cetera. And recently, I left to found my own company, Clinch, which is also about product-led growth, which I'm not going to talk about now, because today it's mostly about Atlassian. So I want to start off with product-led growth and its evolution. How did it all start? And oftentimes, people ask me, and I took this example of a car to explain what product-led growth is. Essentially, when you want to buy a car, you test drive it, right? You look at how fast it drives. You look at the steering. You look at the handling. You look at the air conditioning, music. What you're doing essentially is you are experiencing value before you make a purchase decision. And product-led growth is very, very similar. It's essentially show rather than tell. And Atlassian is one of the companies that pioneered product-led growth, along with a lot of other companies that are doing it really well. So let's look at what the definition of product-led growth is. And I've broken it down into a few components to explain the importance of each of these in product-led growth. So it's an end-user-focused growth model where your product essentially is the driver of acquisition, activation, retention, as well as expansion. Why is it end-user focused? If you look at a lot of companies that do it really well, whether it is Zoom or Slack, your end user is essentially the one that starts using the product. Oftentimes, it's a self-serve motion where you're not talking to a sales rep. You're actually just using the product. You get value, and then you invite your team members, and then you actually start make a purchase decision and then buy. It's a growth model. It's essentially a go-to-market strategy. And there are a lot of different strategies. There are sales-led motions. There are product-led motions. There are hybrid motions, which we'll talk more about it. And then the key thing here is the PLG is responsible for different parts of the funnel. If you make it easy for users to start using your product, one of the things you do is transparent pricing. Any interactions with a rep or a customer service or support when you're really looking to buy is, I would say, from a product-led perspective, is a bad user experience. You want customers to understand the product, the pricing, and then go and start using it. Now let's look at the evolution of this, and then what are some of the pros and cons associated with different motions. So first, I'll start off with a sales-led motion, and this is traditionally how a B2B software has been sold. Businesses prioritize direct selling and relationships, over allowing customers to just go and buy directly. Now, there are some advantages to this. Obviously, one of them is it's effective for high-ticket customers, where you can also customize the product or the software to their needs. It is also time-consuming. Oftentimes, the buying decision doesn't happen right away. You have to know who the buyer is, who the decision maker is, and then really have multiple meetings to convince them, pitch the product correctly, and then make a decision. The second approach is a hybrid approach, which is a combination of product as well as sales-led. Some of the benefits of this approach, and this is where product works closely with sales, go hand in hand. One of them is lower acquisition cost. Your customers, you're not having these demos with customers. They go to your website, they see the value, and then they buy the product. So the cost of acquiring the customer is really low. And that's how a lot of companies like Atlassian, if you look at the amount of money they spend in R&D, is probably in the top 5 or 10% from all the B2B SaaS companies. And the reason they're able to do so is because their customer acquisition cost is very low, which means they have more money to actually invest in product R&D, where product itself becomes that engine of growth for the company. Some of the challenges with hybrid is, one of them is it's difficult to implement without close collaboration. That's really key. Everyone has to understand, how product is driving growth. And then the third one is the product-led itself. And this is where, this typically works when you have individual buyers who are also able to make decisions about product. It's not a very high cost associated with this because you really cannot buy a $500K product with a credit card. So freemium and self-serve are popular ways of doing this as well. A lot of companies that you see either have free trials, which are limited to like 14 days, or freemium models, which are essentially free, but you have feature gates. Now, there are different reasons why companies do that, and it's more strategic, I would say, than anything else. Like if you're a company you're looking to gain market share quickly, a freemium version can work really well. Atlassian is one example that did that. Microsoft Azure is another one. Zoom is the third one. The idea is you are able to acquire customers quickly. You're not focused on monetization as much. Whereas if you do a limited trial, let's say a 14-day trial, you know that customers have to purchase it. So if your strategy is more about monetizing customers, Pendo, Zapier, these are some good examples where you actually only have like 14 days, and then you have to make a decision. So depending on your company's strategy, you can adopt these two different freemium or free trials. Now let's talk about the differences between product-led growth and product-led sales, and what is that ideal, I would say, situation when these two go hand in hand. One of the key differences, basically, in product-led growth, your individual is oftentimes going into the product, looking at it, making a decision to try it. Whereas in the product-led sales world, you actually use that data from those freemium users that are using it, and then you can essentially use that data and then pitch it to your customers. Your pitch could be very different because now, oftentimes you're pitching to the CROs or the head of, revenue ops, or it could be head of marketing, et cetera. Whereas in the product-led growth world, you are actually going by yourself as an end user and making a purchase decision. So the sales is not really involved when it's more like self-serve. Now let's look at how, from an Atlassian perspective, what are some of the ways we do this. The first screenshot that you see is a sign-up for one of the products, Jira, or Confluence in this case, where an individual user can go and sign up for a Confluence using a self-serve motion. Now, I'm interested in essentially using a template for project planning. I can go to Confluence today, sign up for a free trial, and I don't even have to give my credit card. I can start using the product, and then I see value. One of the core principles of PLG is the aspect of virality. And one thing you'll notice is as you start using these products, oftentimes they are built in a way where features are more about collaborating with your team members. Confluence is a great example. You have essentially templates that you can share. You can collaborate. You can comment, invite users. So you see that throughout the journey. And there are several areas within the product where you have a way for you to invite your team members, whether it is the app switcher, the navigation, or in product experiences as well. So that's the first screenshot you see. The second one is more about how you can get value and then invite your team members. So each product has certain aha moment features where once you get value, then we actually ask you to invite your team members so that you can collaborate. So that's where essentially an individual is able to make a decision to buy a product, 0 to 10K investment, for example. Then as your team starts using more and more, there's more collaboration, and then you start inviting more team members. And that's where oftentimes you'll see product using user limits or feature gates where you can only collaborate with more team members if you actually go to the next edition. So that's also product-led growth, because you are still not talking to a sales rep. You're still actually using it and then making a decision to buy the product. Then how does that handoff or collaboration work with sales? Where sales comes into play is if having access to that information, that these are existing customers who are using your trials, and what kind of features are they using? Who is what's the job persona look like? And you could use some of these things to tailor your pitches to the organization itself. How does the enterprise benefit through this collaboration? So those are some examples of how product-led growth and product-led sales work together. Now let's look at what are some of the PLG signals that sales can use to effectively sell software. There are three broad categories of signals. The first is the product usage signal. Each product should have some signals which are essentially value-driving signals, which are aha moments, where that, okay, if a customer has used that feature, that means they have seen value. In case of Jira, some of the features are tickets created, tickets resolved, backlogs created. Like these are aha moments, because we know that if a customer has tried this, then they have gotten some value out of the product. So these could be some really good features that sales can use. And with each of these signals, ideally, like if you have your data science or machine learning teams, you can actually correlate what is the probability of upsell or cross-sell if somebody has used that feature. So that is a very powerful information for sales teams to have. So we actually have given access to, we've created these product signal dashboards and given access to sales teams so that they can go use these signals to understand how products are being used. The second kinds of signals are behavior signals. So you could think of users visiting or trying a feature which is in the next edition. That's a very important information for a sales rep to have, because now they know that, yes, this user has tried an advanced feature. They're not able to use it, yes, because they have a lower edition, but they are shown interest, right? Some buying intent. And that could be really useful when you actually go and pitch. Another one is terms and use. Like if somebody has gotten to seen your terms and use page, that means they might be more interested in understanding how the product works or maybe buying. So all these signals are really powerful for to arm your sales teams, because then they can actually have very tailored conversations with customers. The third type of signals are volume signals. Increase of number of active users within an account. That could be a pretty interesting signals. Or you could say that number of users. A lot of companies like storage companies, for example, Dropbox, even Jira, for example, have storage limits for using your product. Imagine a sales rep knowing that, hey, this person has used 90% of their storage limit. They're probably getting very close to the next edition. I could use that data and then reach out to this customer proactively before they reach out to us, right? So it's more about proactive versus reactive outreach. So these kind of signals can be very helpful in order to have those expansion conversations with your customers. Now let's look at how can sales leverage these product signals, right? Now, what you saw before was, okay, these are the types of signals. Great. Now, what do you do with those signals? So there are certain ways you can leverage these signals to really come up with your own playbook or drive growth. So the first one is identifying high-value signals. So within signals, one of the things we do is, we have core signals and then we have regular signals. Core signals are associated with high-value actions that user take. So if your sales has access to those high-value signals, then they already know that this customer is more likely to convert, right? And you can assign machine learning to assign weights to the signals. Somebody who has created a Jira ticket and resolved it has probably 40% probability to convert versus somebody who just looked at roadmaps feature as an example. Like having those, that data can be very powerful. Now that you have the signals, what are some of the things you can do from a company level, or let's say if you're a sales leader at a company, like what are some of the things you could do? One of them is you can identify buyer or decision maker. So a lot of the data that you have, as long as you're able to correlate that to a person or a persona, you know whether this person is a buyer. Like is that person a CRO, or is it more like an engineer or developer, product manager? Having that information can be really helpful because now you know who's using it and what you need to pitch. You could build triggers to integrate it into your CRM systems, right? HubSpot, Salesforce, etc. Imagine a lead came in, has performed an action that is correlated with a high intent purchase. Now instead of trying to manually go through it, you can actually create some signals or triggers and push those into your CRM systems. You could also generate outreach campaigns based on sequences. You can add them to sequences. So these are some of the automated ways where you could leverage product signals to do outreach. Now this may not work for all the teams or all sales reps, because oftentimes you have SMBs and you have enterprise customers, and these high-touch customers you don't want to send automated messaging and or outreach. So you can still get notified that, hey, this customer has performed an activity which is of high intent, send out an email. So in that case, you're actually not doing it right away, but you're actually giving the sales rep that power to say, draft an email or a message and say, send this over. And then the third part of this is enabling sales routing. So you have the signals. Now you've done some automation to basically integrate these into your CRM systems. Now next thing you could do is also sales routing. Now based on the signals, who the buyer is, you can actually create some intelligence routing to send it to the different sales rep or teams. If it's an enterprise customer, there might be an enterprise sales teams that you want to send this information to. So those are some ways you can take product signals, build some integrations, and then enable sales routing. Now let's look at some specific examples of how we use some of these signals to drive upsell, cross-sell opportunities. The first one is support requests. Having access to this data is really important for a lot of, I would say, companies where your support is a key factor in users making decisions between a free versus a premium or a standard edition. So one of the things we provide our sales teams is access to the support data, and they can look at the support request volume, support resolution time, and then basically outreach and then reach out to customers that have, let's say, response times that are longer, and use that to upsell a higher plan where you get 24/7 support. So that's an example of how you can leverage some of the support data to create an upsell campaign. The second one is daily logins. You have some power users, and then you have some users that use your product not as frequently. Just imagine having that information that okay, these are the 10 users that are using your product on a daily basis, and you can a lot of tools allow you to do that, whether Amplitude or segment. Different analytics tools allow you to do that. And by having that information, you now have a segment of your power users who are using your product, and they might be early adopters. And you can create a campaign or an upsell motion to sell advanced features or in addition to them. So that's another example of what we do with user logins. The third one is a team size. This is another important data point to have, understanding how many users within an account or a team is using it. And it's important to be able to have that segmentation. So working with your analytics and data science team to make sure that they are tracking at that domain level. Once you know how many customers are in a team, you could use that as well for upsell strategies. A lot of products have 2 or 3 licenses. The moment you add another license, you need to upsell. So having that data can be really useful, and it also sales could use that to pitch more like collaboration-based features. If a product has that, because that okay, 4 to 5 people in the team are using it. So I'll give you an example from Atlassian. So one of the products we have is Trello. Trello is essentially, you can create these boards where you can collaborate. You can create to-do lists. You can do stand-ups, and oftentimes it requires multiple people as part of the board collaborating with each other. And one of the things we do is we see how many people are collaborating, and if the number is high enough, then we can actually use that to go and show feature gates or drive upsell. So that's another example of how you could use team size. And this outreach can happen depending on what kind of company it is. If it's non-PLG, then you can do email campaigns, or you can use that in your phone conversations. If it's a PLG, you can have what we call it as these in-product messaging. The moment you see that the team size is increasing, you can then pop up a message not in an obtrusive way, but like enabling users to know what the value they get by upgrading, and more collaborative features could be part of that pop-up. The fourth one is the feature usage, and this is also a very I would say interesting data point to look at, and could be used both for cross-sell as well as upsell. Oftentimes we have these feature maps where we can correlate feature usage of one product into feature usage into another product. Customers who are using certain features in Jira are more likely to use certain features in Confluence. Now, this could be very useful because now you could also tailor your outreach to customers to cross-sell. So having that mapping can be really helpful. And this is really useful for companies that have multiple products. So if you look at companies like ServiceNow, Atlassian, Adobe, you have like 15, 20 different products, and whenever you're launching a new product, cross-sell becomes so important to drive early adoption. So having the feature usage can be really useful in that case. Now, a lot of you may have been come across what's happening in the AI space, especially in the generative AI space, and there's how could you use some of these things to really drive sales, and what are some of the trends that you're starting to see in some of the common products that are available in the market. There are 5 key areas where AI can be very helpful in order to essentially help your company with discovery of leads, or lead routing, or sales forecasting, churn prediction, etc. So the first one is around lead generation. Predictive analytics can be very helpful in identifying who the right lead is. Imagine having the data of from Crunchbase, LinkedIn, all what customers are searching for, having and who the job title is. Having that data can be very helpful to essentially identify high propensity leads, whether it is free to paid leads, upsell, cross-sell. So this is a trend that you're going to see more and more happening, which is lead scoring propensity. The second is the so lead generation and lead scoring. The way they differ is lead generation is essentially identifying who your potential lead is, and then lead scoring is about assigning a propensity score to that. The third one is sales forecasting. Having insights about your customers based on what they have done in the past, what their how they've used your products, how much they have spent, and then also overlaying that with some of the macroeconomic conditions. It could be budgets are tightening, for example, or seasonality occurs. So what are some of the things that can really play in, and by forecasting the sales and how much your customer can generate could be very useful, and AI can help you there as well. The fourth one is the personalized engagement, the ability to craft personalized content to maximize engagement. Now, if you know who the customer is, whether it's a CRO, whether it's a marketing head, a lot of the generative AI platforms or even LLMs that you create can have the ability to tailor that conversation and messaging. And another way where this could be useful is oftentimes, in sales, you have folks that are really good at selling something, and they may be using certain keywords or certain strategies, and some others may not be using that. So with AI, you can actually create, you have all this data, and you can come up with templates or essentially keywords or themes that can be more effective, and you can monitor and measure these things as well. So that's where the personalized engagement comes into play. And then the last one is churn prediction. Identifying your at-risk customers, and this could be really helpful, essentially during these times when a lot of companies are focusing on revenue preservation rather than trying to acquire more customers. And AI can create these churn drivers, and that data could be very useful for your customer success or even sales teams to have proactive conversations with your customers. The feature usage has dropped. For example, support tickets have been created, daily logins have gone down. Like, these are all data points that we use in essentially identifying churn propensity for customers, and then based on that we automate outreach. So those are some of the trends, and you'll see more and more of how AI can actually help drive sales in these organizations. So I want to sign off with a few key takeaways. The first one is maximize and measure product usage. I cannot stress the importance of this. Really go and ask your product teams, your data science team, how are customers using my product? Do I have access to the dashboard? If not, work with them to create it. Because the more data you have, the more insights you have, the more I would say power you have to go and tailor those pitches and sell to your customers. The second one is all teams should have product-led mindset. As an example, you'll see in a lot of PLG companies how marketing teams are thinking about content-driven marketing. Sales looks at product signals to drive sales. When product managers are building features, there's a list of things that they look for before even building out a roadmap, which is self-serve, transparent pricing, easy onboarding. So really having that product-led mindset is really important. The third is using tools and automation to essentially speed up the process and reduce the manual time it takes. There are a lot of tools available in the market, but the challenge is that you have 14, 15 tools that you're using for lead propensity, lead generation, automation. So really spend time to analyze and find out tools which can really help you, give you the data, the power you have, so you don't, your teams are not switching manually between 20 different tools. And then the last one is leverage AI to assist sales. So really think about what could we do. That's also where some of the tools come into play is, are there features where we could use to arm your sales teams, make them more productive? whether it is templates, whether it is messaging, identify buyer persona. There's a lot that could be done, and think of your product teams as a way for you to generate pipeline. That's how a lot of PLG companies works, is they often rely on product and teams to generate pipeline for you. And then you have that data and information to go and sell even more effectively. So those are some of the key takeaways for how sales can use some of these PLG strategies to drive more customer acquisition, expansion, retention. All right. I think that's it.